there was a 37-year-old German and his Ukrainian wife who could get up to 1 year in prison for what they did. So my congratulations to you. And on this day of the freedom of information, and these people wanted to spread this information in freedom, so...
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Minister, on behalf of the UN Correspondent Association for this press conference. It's Valeria Robeco from ANSA, Newswire. So my question is on Ukraine. Yesterday, former President Trump met with President Zelensky and promised that if he will be elected, if he will win the election in November, he's going to get the war resolved quickly. And so what's your comment on this? What do you think about this meeting? Thank you so much.
As far as I know, Mr. Trump spoke several months ago that he would, and he said that he would need 24 hours. Now his position has changed somewhat. We will be glad to see any initiative that brings about the desired result, and there is only one desired result: to settle the issue by addressing the root causes of the Ukraine crisis. And the root cause of the Ukraine crisis is primarily the fact that despite all the assurances that they provided us, NATO continued to expand, and the West failed to live up to the obligations not to reinforce its security at the expense of others, and so that no country within the OSCE space or organization would not seek dominance. And this is what NATO did. It sought to expand its dominance. It drew new countries into its structures. It deployed its military infrastructure there, and Ukraine was next in line. And this created immediate security threats for the Russian Federation, since NATO planned deploying military bases along the Sea of Azov coast and in Crimea, and to deploy weapons there that would be a threat to the Russian Federation. We cannot accept this. Of course, security matters are always important, but this is not an abstract notion, but this is something people, ordinary people, need. So when today the Secretary General and his spokesperson say that the United Nations has invariably championed a settlement under the UN Charter and territorial integrity of Ukraine and under the norms of international law, but those who head the Secretariat must have a better knowledge of the Charter. I mentioned this in my remarks during the general debate of the UN General Assembly, when I said that what matters the most in this Charter, and the Founding Fathers thought also along these lines, because when they said in Article 1 that you have respect the rights of any person, regardless of their race, gender, or religion, they have prioritized human rights, and they did everything to include into the Pact of the Future to emphasize human rights as an utmost priority. And they even went as far as say that the Human Rights Council has to have an authority that goes beyond the Charter, but in connection with Ukraine, they did not mention human rights at all. I said about respecting the rights of any person, regardless of religion, without distinction to race or religion or anything else, but the Russian language has been virtually eliminated in Ukraine. From kindergartens to university, it has been purged from the media. in culture. They're throwing away books from libraries, just like in Nazi Germany. They're throwing away Russian language books. And only recently, Ukraine adopted a law to ban the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And in the Ukrainian Constitution still stipulates that the Ukrainian state provides for the right of the Russian ethnic minority and other ethnic minority, including in terms of education. But for some reason, we have yet to receive a reply from the West or the Secretary General. Why is everybody silent when there are so many initiatives around in terms of our approaches to settling this issue, in terms of security, in terms of the fact that it would be unacceptable for us if Ukraine entered NATO and joined NATO. And there is also the issue of human rights. This is not about territory. Zelensky has been saying about recovering territory within the 1991 borders. We're not talking about territories. We're talking about people who have been living there for centuries, developed this land. They built roads and ships and everything there. So these are the true reasons. If Trump is able to have these laws cancelled, this would be a major step forward. It's just as easy as that. You just vote on it. But there is another aspect to this matter, but nobody mentioned this. But President Putin has highlighted many times the fact that there is a ban in Ukraine on talks with Russia, a law banning these talks. But how they're going to move forward on this agenda, we don't know. But Russia's position is very clear. We need to address the root causes, and everybody knows about this.
Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic Daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Thank you, Mr. Minister, and thank you, Maria. Mr. Minister, Russia has been advocating a multipolar system, cooperation among the major powers to make this world a little better. Do you see that the war in the Middle East, if Israel and its allies prevail, will weaken Russia and Russian doctrine for a multipolar system? How can Russia make sure that this world, continues to be built on cooperation among major powers, rather than leave one hegemonic power, especially in the Middle East? Thank you very much.
You know, our vision of what is happening in the Middle East and all these tragedies, this is not an exaggeration on my behalf, in terms of how the outcome would affect our international standing. This is not our position. What we want is to save human lives in Palestinian territories after the October 7 terrorist attacks, and we condemned these attacks so firmly. But now Palestinians are facing collective punishment by Israel. And after October 7, 2023, according to the latest statistics, 41,000 Palestinian civilians died since then, and about 100,000 people were wounded. And these numbers are still growing. So in a year, there were 41 civilians dead. Just to compare, for the sake of comparison, after the government coup in Ukraine in 2014, and those who staged this government coup said that people living in the east of Ukraine were terrorists, and they launched a war against them. In fact, it was a civil war. In 10 years, on both sides of the Ukraine conflict, there were 2.5 times less civilian casualties compared to the number of civilian casualties among Palestinians within 1 year. So this is these are very sad statistics, and the number of Palestinian casualties continue to grow, and we want this bloodshed to stop as soon as possible. all of the mechanisms that existed for facilitating the Middle East peace process, they shut them down, including the quartet of international mediators, which included Russia, the United States, the United Nations, and the EU. And now the United States wants a monopoly in terms of its mediation efforts, and they have been creating various formats with Jordan, with Egypt, with Qatar, but still it is the United States that is trying to run the show. They are drafting the documents they show to everyone, and that they believe could stop the conflict, but every time Israel seeks to raise the stakes. What happened yesterday in Beirut was another political assassination. I heard that President Biden that it was the right thing to do, but they have a somewhat different perspective on how they must act in a situation of conflict. You remember Hillary Clinton when they showed live the footage of Muammar Gaddafi, how she was laughing at looking at this footage. Or Madeleine Albright, take her for example, who commented on the Iraqi aggression. She said, yes, 400,000 people did die, but it was worth it for democracy. So there is no reason, as there was no reason for invading Iraq, so there were no weapons of mass destruction, and everybody knows this, and this did not change anything. The United States wanted a monopoly on the Middle East peace process and beyond. They are now focusing on the Indo-Pacific space. They are creating various blocks like AUKUS or Quad, the four, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. They are drawing the Philippines in a similar structure like Quad. So when they're working on the regional agenda, all the United States wants is to preserve its hegemony. This is not our approach in this regard. We believe that turning a blind eye to thousands and hundreds of thousands of victims and casualties would not be the right thing to do. We cannot allow this hegemony to continue. Mr. Lavrov, good afternoon, and much has been said during this UN General Assembly about reforming the United Nations. Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, talked about this, and he suggested excluding Russia from the UN Security Council. Is this possible? And how could we treat proposals along these lines? Well, you know, these hot Finnish guys, this is a very special nation. I know Alexander Stubb well. He used to be foreign minister. And during the 5-day war unleashed by Saakashvili against South Ossetia and against Russian peacekeepers, Right after it ended, he went to Tbilisi and he stopped over in Moscow on his way back, and we were face to face, and he talked to me about his meeting with Saakashvili, and he used obscene language. He called him a lunatic. And you can imagine the other words he used in this context. And I asked him to share this information with others, but he said, no, I will not do that. Well, there are many stories that relate to the Scandinavian countries, a lot of fairy tales, but on a more serious note, Does he want to be more Ukrainian than Ukrainians themselves? We know that there are a lot of talk about Russia being illegitimate in Ukraine, and former Soviet republics also have this rhetoric, and everything stayed the same as when the United Nations was founded. Regarding China, for example, there's a Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. When Russia became the UN Security Council member and replaced the Soviet Union, there were no changes because everyone understood this well. I was surprised by the Secretary General, who talked about the UN Security Council reform, and among the permanent members there is Russia, France, and Great Britain. And there was a question, do you believe that Russia is just like France and Great Britain, so we belong to the same group of European countries? This way of seeing the geopolitical landscape in the world is very questionable. After all, we heard it from the Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the opportunity. I'm Sherry Fitcherton from Anadolu Agency. And I would like to ask you, you know that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, right after leaving the UN building, well, the place built to maintain international peace and security, ordered the attack on Beirut. And as you have also mentioned, Nasrallah, chief of Hezbollah, was killed with these attacks. Do you think killing Nasrallah will lead Israel to stop, or are you worried that Israel may proceed, for example, to occupy south of Lebanon? Thank you.
What's
the first political assassination? Remember the assassination in the capital of Iran of a figure who took part in the funeral ceremony of the former president of Iran. It's not just an assassination, it was a cynical act. We also had a strike against the Iranian consulates in Syria, where Iranian citizens died. And now Nasrallah. It is not only my feeling, I've heard this from many people, that Israel wants to create a pretext for the United States to get involved into this war directly. And in order to have such an incident, they're trying to provoke Iran and Hezbollah. The Iranian leaders are showing a very responsible approach, and this must be appreciated. You can also draw some parallels with Ukraine. Zelensky is also doing everything he can to provoke a direct involvement of NATO countries in combat, so that he could step aside and look at what he hopes will save him. I don't think this is a correct path. I think we need to just stop the bloodshed and abandon the terrorist methods of settling political issues.
Alan Dargan with MTV Lebanon. Thank you, Maria. Great seeing you, Mr. Lavrov. So, killing Hassan Nasrallah, do you expect retaliation from Iran? But there's a feeling also among the Hezbollah followers that Iran abandoned Hezbollah. It was just slogans. We're going to support Hezbollah. We're going to stand with Hezbollah. We're gonna fight alongside with Hezbollah. But when the real moment came, as usual, Iran just was watching, used its proxies, and never will be involved, such as. What do you think? What's your take on that?
I do not think I'm entitled to comment on the problems of Iran and the interests of Iran. And I cannot answer questions about what Iran is going to do. It is not proper.
Hi, Minister. This is Xu Dezhi with China Central Television. Basically, two questions. First one is a very quick question. President Zelensky here in this building said several times that Russia is planning to attack Ukrainian nuclear power plants. What is your response? And second, we know that Brazil, China, and other mine-like country launched a platform called Friends of Peace to mediate Russia and Ukraine crisis. Will Russia consider any plan from the Global South, and how do you think the Global South will make a difference in this?
As to the statement by Mr. Zelensky, I think everyone has grown used to his impromptu performances. I think he managed to perform better when he performed on stage. And he also said that every item of the peace formula is based on the principles and goals of the UN Charter. And he spoke about the Chinese-Brazil initiative in a very rude manner. He said he doesn't understand why they proposed it, that maybe they want a Nobel Peace Prize. And then he went on to say that there are no different UN charters for different parts of the world, that there is no separate UN charters for BRICS or for G7, that there is no Russian-Iranian charter or a Chinese-Brazilian UN charter. So this is his appreciation of the obviously well-intended efforts that our colleagues from China and Brazil are taking. We have discussed their plans with our colleagues from different delegations, and I inquired about the specific content of those initiatives, because the Chinese-Brazilian initiative includes calls for peace and justice and the implementation of national law, and that is something no one's going to dispute. But as to their specific way forward, no one has informed me yet about what they're going to propose, and as far as I know, it is still under consideration. So, this Friends of Peace group was announced, and not all of the countries that were present at that meeting were interested in participating. So it was created here in New York at the level of permanent representatives. I don't know whether it's possible for permanent representatives to deal with this issue on a constant basis, but they're talented people. Let them try and see what happens. But answering your first question, President Xi, when he proposed not a Ukrainian but a global peace initiative in February 2023, it had a key item. That initiative covered all conflicts. It had approaches to settle any conflicts. A key method to resolving problems in a crisis region was stipulated to be talking about ways to resolve the root causes of a conflict. And the root causes of the Ukraine crisis is the fact that the Kiev regime was pulled into NATO. It was planned to be included, and Stoltenberg and other NATO representatives repeat that from time to time. And second is their impingement on Russian-speaking minorities' rights. The stamping out of Russian language, the Russian Orthodox Church. And no one banned the Arabic language in Israel. And Zelensky is trying to ban the Russian language, even though the majority of Ukrainian citizens speak that language. And so those people who work here at the permanent representative level they will have to consider these root causes. They will not be able to ignore these. They will have to be guided by the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, and not in a selective manner, but taking all of them into account. The human rights that I spoke about are also a charter principle, and they are being violated in a terrible manner. The rights of national minorities, the rights of ethnic minorities in Ukraine are being violated. And interpreting the principle of territorial integrity, you cannot ignore that it's interconnected with the principle of the self-determination of peoples. Back in 1970, as are told our Chinese and Brazilian colleagues, the General Assembly adopted unanimously a declaration where it said that territorial integrity of states must be respected if their governments represent the entirety of the people living in that territory, and if they respect the right of peoples to self-determination. In 2008, everyone was very calm when Kosovo was declared independent in a unilateral manner. Everyone applauded the United States statements that it is a manifestation of the self-determination right. And when in 2014, after the bloody coup in Ukraine, Nazis took power in Kiev and started war in Crimea, and Crimea held a referendum, the Americans said that that would not do, because territorial integrity would be the principle to be considered. So if you want to solve this crisis, you need to get to the root causes of it, and you need to be based on the UN Charter, and not, as it was said, when you must be guided by the principles of territorial integrity and the UN Charter. You must consider all of the principles expressed there. So this is my message to those who will be working in that Friends of Peace group. RT French question. Separatists active in Mali spoke on air on France 24. It said they had contacts with Ukraine. Russia is an ally of Mali. How can Russia comment on that? The fact that there are contacts between Ukraine and those who oppose the Mali government. And what should be done for the international community to hold Ukraine accountable? We have already discussed the situation, and we showed the evidence that Ukrainians are working with terrorist organizations which are trying to fight the legitimate government of Mali. And only recently there was an attack on a group of Mali troops, and there was a large number of people killed. And that was done in conjunction with the Ukrainians. And that is not the only place this is happening. In the Idlib de-escalation zone in Syria, China-Taiwan is still powerful, and the Ukrainians have their ties with those. They either recruit people to fight with them, or they help them to organize and stage various provocations. So after this happened in Mali, after the Nazi troops were killed by those terrorists, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso has said to the Security Council that it must condemn the actions of Ukraine. And some of those countries, I think, even broke off diplomatic relations with Ukraine. So that is certainly crime, and we think that African countries which want to live independently and choose their own path must have a security support to be able to defend themselves.
Yes, Mr. Lavrov, Jamil Shadi from Brazil.
That is something we're doing.
The question is again on the China-Brazil initiative. In the statement yesterday, it says that there is a consideration on the legitimate interests of the parties. This was read by some as obviously following what you just said. Do you think that at least this plan can break the impasse that happens at this moment? And as you said, the root causes should be dealt. In the declaration yesterday, are the root causes stated clearly?
Ну, вы почитайте то, что вы сейчас процитировали.
Well, you can read the text that you've just quoted and compare it with what I just said. I didn't see any plan of action in the statement. I saw a declaration of intent. It's like saying you must fight for everything that is good and fight everything that is evil. Many years ago, when there was a routine discussion of the Israeli-Palestine discussion in the Security Council, Russia, the US, the UN Secretariat, and the EU, the Quartet, devised a roadmap for a settlement of this conflict through the creation of an independent Palestinian state. It laid out a one-year plan stipulating the exact steps to be taken each month. That was the plan. But it didn't materialize, obviously, because we wouldn't have the war that we're seeing in the Middle East today if it had been. So I can only say to the people who are going to be working as part of this Friends of Peace group that they should read the UN Charter and read it well. I've spoken about it at the Security Council and elsewhere. We have warned about the Ukraine situation for a long time, that Ukraine should not be drawn into NATO. We warned not to impinge on the rights of Russian-speaking people. But Zelensky gave an interview before the special military operation, and he was asked about his opinion of the people who did not accept the results of the coup d'etat. And he said, well, there are people and there are some species. Well, I said that if, and Zelensky said that if you feel part of the Russian culture and you live in Ukraine, you should get out of Ukraine and go live in Russia. And the Ukrainian ambassador in Kazakhstan said that their main goal is to kill as many Russians as possible so that their children would have less work to do. I don't remember anyone holding him accountable or anyone covering that situation in the correct light. So there's only one thing I do not understand, is how the French and the Swiss decided to take part in that meeting. Switzerland is not neutral any longer. They are pushing for Ukrainian victory over Russia zealously, and France is supplying long-range weapons and rockets to Ukraine. And I asked a Chinese colleague, and he said that those delegations were very eager to get in, and we invited them as observers to the meeting. So that group has a lot of work before it, and we would be willing to provide advice. We would only like them to base their work on the actual situation and not just empty talk.
It's Pamela Falk from U.S. News and World Report. Thank you.
Remember.
Yes, it's been a long time. And thank you for the briefing. My question is an update from last year, which is, can you tell us any negotiations or status of the children of Ukraine who were taken to Russia? We talked about the commissioner and her work on it. There's a few hundred, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood, according to the ICC, of 19,000 children. I've also understood that the country of Qatar is serving as an intermediary. Is there any update on all this? Thank you.
Yes, we do publish these materials. Do you have a representative in Moscow? Do you have your own representative in Moscow?
Pamela personally, but she failed to come.
I'm sorry.
Do you have your representative in Moscow?
No, I've changed news organizations, as you may know. So.
No. I speak about your current news organization.
Oh, I'd have to check that.
У нас сейчас Мария скажет, у нас.
Well, Ms. Zakharova will tell us, since our previous meeting, we updated our information many times. I won't go over the numbers. We invited many international journalists to special briefing sessions, and recently, well, some time ago, some facts emerged that many and hundreds of the children who were listed as allegedly kidnapped, they surfaced in Germany. They turned out to be over there. Well, in fact, there are many people who belong to sexual minorities, so this is not an easy question.
We want to reiterate our invitation in your new capacity to come to Moscow to make interviews with officials. Please welcome. So, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. With CNBC Turkey. Two questions. First, Turkey's purchase of the S-400 missile defense systems from Russia has created tensions with the U.S. and resulted in Turkey's removal from the F-35 program. Recently, a former Turkish minister proposed that Turkey could sell its S-400s to a third country like India or Pakistan. How would Russia react to such a move, a potential sale of the S-400s to these countries, and what implications could this have for Russia-Turkey relations? And if I may, a second question. Former President Donald Trump has suggested that the war in Ukraine would have never started if he were in office, and that he could stop the war if re-elected on day one. Would Russia be open to a peace deal proposed by Trump if re-elected? And what conditions would need to be met for Russia to agree such a deal? Thank you.
Regarding the S-400 missile systems, the air defense systems that Russia delivered it to Turkey. I have nothing to say. President Erdogan is a very experienced statesman, and he is the one who takes decisions on any matters in the interests of his state and his people. And the only thing here I can add that in contracts dealing with the sale of these weapons, so there is always a provision on the end-use certificate, so that the products that are delivered with this certificate, if the end user is the country that received these weapons, in order to be able to do anything with these weapons, you need the agreement of the country that sold these weapons. As for Mr. Trump, you see, this war would have never started if, but what is this if? I can also makes this kind of statement. February 2014, Yanukovych was president of Ukraine at that time, and hundreds of people were taking with Western funding to the streets, and they signed an agreement with the president, the opposition, and the president to hold an early election. But before holding this early election, they had to establish a national unity government. And this was guaranteed by France, Germany, and Poland, but the very next morning the opposition took over the government building, and we had a question: why did they do this? What we heard from our colleagues in Germany and France, we heard that sometimes democracies take unpredictable steps, and we heard statements along the similar lines from the United States. So with the implementation of this accord, Ukraine would have stayed within the 1991 borders, and Zelensky has been talking about these borders all the time. Who asked them to undermine their own legitimacy? But they undermine this legitimacy for good as part of this regime, as long as this regime remains in power. And I want everyone to understand this would have kept Crimea within Ukraine if, but only if, 1 year later, they signed under the Minsk agreements, and there was a relevant UN security resolution to this effect. Had Ukraine fulfilled this resolution, they would have kept the eastern territories, not Crimea, because they've already lost Crimea by that time. In April 22, in Istanbul, there was an agreement between Russian and Ukrainian negotiators, and had they fulfilled this agreement, Ukraine would have kept part of Donbass. But every time when you derail an agreement with Russia, every time Ukraine becomes smaller. And regarding the Istanbul agreements, the head of the Ukrainian delegation gave an interview, and he recognized that Boris Johnson came to Kyiv, and he said that we don't need any agreements, just keep on fighting, we will give you weapons and money and whatever. So I just gave some facts to you, presented some facts to you. If Ukraine follows down the same path, if Ukraine continues to use all these kind of tricks to win sometime, they will never succeed. And I do hope that our friends in China and Brazil and all those who are part of this Friends of Peace group will take into consideration the way the current Ukrainian leadership acts in all its aspects and its attempts to trick everyone into this shady ground.
Thank you, Minister, for your time and for this press briefing. I'm Musala from Azerbaijan News Agency report. So my question is, President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan will attend the upcoming BRICS and CIC summit, which to be held in Russia next month. In October. So, is there any planned meeting between two country leaders for more peace talks or negotiation with Russian initiatives or participations? Thank you very much.
Well,
it's up to them.
It's up to them, as the saying goes. If they want to meet, well, we had a meeting between ministers here with the participation of the U.S. Secretary of State, and the United States does want to play a dominant role in this regard. Just as we discussed with the Middle East issue, the United States wants to call the shots in this regard. If this sits well with our friends in Azerbaijan and Armenia, this is up to their leaders to decide. As for us, we're always ready to work along the deals agreed by our leaders. Since 2020, there were several meetings. The heads met. There are trilateral working groups to unblock transport communications. There are mechanisms in place to delineate the border and so on and so forth. And we are ready to live up to all our commitments. And then that's all there is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. My name is Sinan with Ruda Media Network. I have a quick question about the Hezbollah leader that, after Nasrallah that, what Russia can do to prevent a spillover to Syria and Iraq? And I have a really quick another question. We know Russia has been urging Turkey and Syria to normalize their relationship. And if that happens, how that's going to affect the Syrian Kurds? Thank you very much.
Well, you know, once again, we want the UN Security Council to live up to its mandate and functions. It has tools at its disposal that enable this to influence the party that does not comply with its decisions. But the United States stands in the way. They want to call the shots, as I've already said, and there are too many challenging issues around the world right now. You cannot count them on a single hand or on two hands. They've blocked all the proposals and the resolution they've submitted for adoption. It was just a misleading initiative. The United States pretended that Israel was ready to abide by this resolution, but it was a lie, and we abstained, and we did not use our veto right because our Arab friends asked us to give it a chance. How do you prevent a spillover to other countries? Well, this is the gist of my reply to you. This is what we're going to do. The Syrian Arab Republic, at the request of its legitimate government, we have our military force there, and it will fulfill its mandate there. Let me reiterate that some are willing to provoke Iran in order to then provoke the United States and unleash a major and real war. Well, we have a real war right now, but this could lead to a full regional war. And on your second question, yes, we did have meeting about Syrian-Turkish normalization. There were military-to-military meeting and foreign ministry level meeting. So there is the Astana Troika on the Syrian settlement, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and the Syrian Arab Republic. And these meetings went quite well on a positive note, and only recently, together with my colleague from Turkey, we talked to each other and we discussed this, and I discussed this with the new foreign minister of the Syrian Arab Republic, and on both sides there are certain ideas that could help us resume this process. And yes, you are right, the Kurdish issue will be central in these talks, along with matters like fighting terrorism and border control. There is the Aden Agreement as a precedent that dates back to the 1980s, and well, it cannot be used today, but the concept it relies on that provides for Syria and Turkey working together to ensure security on the border and to fight terrorist groups, this concept could be workable and can apply if adopted, of course. But The problem is with the United States. Even here, the United States wanted to do everything as it pleases, and it has a force in the Syrian Arab Republic, a military presence there. On the left bank of the Euphrates River, they've created a quasi-state there. They extract and drill Syrian oil. They harvest Syrian grain, they sell it, and they use this money to sponsor those whom they support. And I believe that the Kurdish organizations must denounce terrorism and break any links to terrorists. They have no other choice than to be part of the Syrian state. This is what we believe. At a certain stage, we were ready to work along these lines. They know our position, but for some reason, they asked for our help only when Trump said that they were withdrawing from Syria. This is when we had Kurds who wanted to talk to us, and then the United States did not want to leave anymore, and we lost the Kurds. They didn't want to talk to us anymore. So this is very short-sighted, which fails to reflect a long-term vision for the people of Kurdistan, for the Kurds.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Minister Lavrov. I have two questions, one about the Middle East and the other about the Ukraine. The Middle East, after the refusal of the latest proposal on ceasefire for 21 days by Prime Minister Netanyahu, is there a possibility of implementing Resolution 2735 in this climate of escalation in the region? And in the Ukraine, President Putin said that any lifting of restrictions of on the use of long-range missiles supplied by the West to the Ukraine would be a declaration of war. We understand now they're getting very close to announcing the lifting of these restrictions. Maybe they will limit them a certain distance, 20, 40 kilometers, I don't know, but they're getting very close to doing that. What does that mean then? Thank you, sir.
Вы серьезно хотите, что я вам сказал?
Do you really want me to tell you?
Насчет резолюции 2735.
Speaking about Resolution 2735, I'm not the correct person to ask about whether it can be implemented today. It's a question to be posed to Israel and to the United States. It was them who said that this resolution would enable a reduction of tension, would allow to start the escalation. But this is not happening. I don't see any desire on the part of Israel to implement any kind of peace plan. Did I answer a question?
Mr. Lavrov, Bisan Abu Quaik with Al Jazeera Arabic. You just said that you wanted the Security Council to actually take responsibility in terms of averting a bigger, wider regional war. What are the tools that you would suggest that the Security Council would use in light of the continuous use of the veto, especially when it comes to Gaza? And do you think that Chapter 7 should be on the table?
I really said that the Security Council has some possibilities which include Article 7 of the UN Charter, even though all of the parts should be implemented, and all of the resolutions of the Security Council should be implemented, as it is said in the Charter. There is a specific chapter about enforcement. There is, for example, a demand to stop weapon supplies. You can issue a resolution demanding a cessation of weapon supplies. It can also always be done when the conflict is going too far. But the United States will veto such a resolution. You could propose sanctions against those who do not comply with Security Council resolutions, but that would also be vetoed. So there are tools that could be used, but we shouldn't despair because the resolutions are vetoed, because it is not always done without any harm to one's reputation. As we have the saying that small drops of water will erode a big stone.
Mr. Minister, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, said yesterday the long arm of Israel can reach anywhere in the Middle East. Today you have the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. Do you expect any future for the peace process in the Middle East or not? This is the first part. Second part, does Russia accept, the expanding and reforming of Security Council and increasing the 5 members to 10 members in Security Council, or you have any comment on it?
As to your first question, I think I have answered this several times about our opinion about what's happening. It should be stopped immediately. After the Security Council reform, I haven't heard about any proposal to make 10 permanent members. The idea that has been floated for a long time is to strengthen the Council by adding candidates from Africa, Asia and Latin America. Western countries and their allies such as Japan should not be added under any pretext.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for doing this. We always greatly appreciate your coming to talk to the UN Press Corps. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Can you comment on the changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine that President Putin announced recently? Are these intended as a signal to the West? And if so, what is it that Moscow wants to signal? Thank you.
President Putin has said it all, and he made it exceedingly clear without consigning anything to silence. When the President makes a public statement, we assume that those who have an interest in our approaches have the opportunity to hear. And whether they understand what they hear, it is something that we will see after they give Ukraine permission to use longer-range weapons or not. So whether they do it will be an indication of whether they heard what he said.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Thank you very much, Mr. Lavrov. Jorge Gestoso from Telesur. Couple of questions in 3 weeks. The summit of the BRICS at Kazan in Russia. Could be expected the admission of any other country from Latin America? And the second part of the question, how Russia is seeing the political situation in Latin America?
Well, certainly not like the Monroe Doctrine would have it. We have friendly relations with all of our partners. Latin America is a very powerful pole in the polycentric world that is taking shape. And CELAC is now getting a second lease of life, with the President Lula coming to the fore. There are many initiatives to create mechanisms for trade, cooperation and investment without being dependent on mechanisms controlled by the United States through the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO. As to the prospect of BRICS expansion, at the current stage, all of the members see it best not to take any additional steps. We had 5 members, now we're 10, so certainly we require a period of accommodation so that the new members can have a smooth onboarding, considering the traditions that the 5 have had for a long time. But we will have a summit in Kazan, as you said, and we will solicit recommendations from leaders such as those given at the summit in Johannesburg regarding what modalities could be devised for BRICS partners who would be present permanently, not as invited guests, but as permanent partners, so that they can be involved in, well, practically all of the areas in which the alliance is active. And there are about 20 countries who desire to be partners, and about a dozen want to have permanent contacts without acquiring the status of a partner. So the decision is to be made by the president, and I'm not to decide about it. It is up to them to find an agreement, but we will announce it in due course. Mr. Lavrov, you've mentioned Georgia. How could you comment on the recent statements by Georgian officials that it was Saakashvili who started the war? And do you think it is possible to find any new arrangement for Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Well, it is obvious that the current Georgian leadership is just making an honest assessment of the past. They have said that they want a historical reconciliation, and what forms and shapes this reconciliation could take is up to the countries to decide. South Ossetia and Abkhazia are neighbors with Georgia, so they will always have some contacts, and if they are interested in normalizing their relations and ensuring that neither of them attacks others, we would be willing to help. And as to the fact that it was Saakashvili who started the war, it was well known to everyone except maybe our Western colleagues and the Georgian president, Ms. Zurabishvili, because right after it happened in 2008, the European Union commissioned a study or an investigation carried out by Heidi Tagliavini, the well-respected Swiss scholar, and her report said it quite clearly that it was Saakashvili who started the war.
Welcome again, Minister Lavrov, and to you, Maria Masha. We go back a very long way.
Keep it tight, Evelyn. Keep it tight.
Very tight, because we all have to go. Yeah, right.
Don't
and I
act
was
like conductor.
And I certainly agree that no books anywhere should be banned, including in this country where it seems to be prevalent these days. But what surprised me in your speech, why did you mention
Can you keep it like this? Because the sound is floating.
Oh. Am I too close to the mic? Anyway, why did you mention Busha? If I were a Russian official, I would try to ignore that. What happened here? Just keep it. Okay.
So what surprised you?
The question is why you mentioned Busha.
Bucha?
Bucha. If I were a Russian official, I would try to ignore that massacre. You put it into your General Assembly speech.
Not only in my speech. I raise it every time
You do.
I see Antonio Guterres. I did it last year at the Security Council meeting where he was present. I did it year before last. Evelyn, очень простое объяснение. Вы, наверное, вот я просто...
The explanation is very simple.
Вот сегодня же день доступа к информации, да?
It amazes me. Today, I think you have the Information Access Day. So you don't have access to information which is floating freely on the internet and on social media. When in April 2022 in Istanbul, it was agreed that we would stop military action, that we would accept an agreement with the Ukrainians. And Boris Johnson intervened to disrupt that, and even before the talks failed, we were asked as a gesture of goodwill to withdraw our troops from Kiev, from the outskirts of Kiev, including the Bucha village. And we, assuming that we're dealing with honest people and not liars, we did that. But of course we were deceived. And there is a video available online that after the Russian troops withdrew from the city, that city's mayor is speaking on camera, is saying proudly that they regained control of the city, there are no Russians. And 2 days passed, and a BBC team, a team of the renowned BBC, showed footage filmed not in a cellar, but on the central street of Bucha, strewn with bodies. They said that that is something the Russians did when they were here. They claimed that crime was made after 2 days passed. And of course, new sanctions were announced after this happened. And it's certainly useless to expect any kind of investigation. We did the simplest thing. We asked for a list of people whose dead bodies were shown on the BBC. But that request was met with silence. I asked Mr. Guterres, and I reminded him yesterday, and he said that they had already conveyed that request to the Ukrainian regime, but Ukraine does not respond. And that means that they're not willing to show what they have. And the OHCR also made that request on our behalf. So the only thing they say is massacre. You know how Biden described it, so there's no secret about it. Just a staged event. It's like with Navalny. When he got sick and the Germans requested that he let out for treatment, and we immediately allowed them to take him to Germany without any air traffic formalities even. And then they examined him and he was okay, but then they transferred him to a military hospital and said he was poisoned by a military-grade toxic agent. And while he was there in Germany, we asked them to show us the lab reports that prove that he was poisoned with that substance. But the Germans said that that was classified, that they would provide it to the Chemical Weapons Organization. And when we requested that the organization provide that to us, they said the Germans did not consent to them showing the results to us. Doesn't that seem suspicious? So after the death of Navalny, we made that request to the Germans once again, asking them to shed light on the matter, but they refused again. And the same thing happened in Salisbury with the Skripals, despite the fact that the general prosecutor and the investigative committee asked the authorities to provide any kind of information. They refused. They just reaped the media benefits by defaming Russia. But after the media forget about the event, they just drop it. So we will push to the end, demanding the truth about Bucha and other matters to be thrown under the light. Guys, you're professionals, I hope. You must take an honest interest in what happened. Otherwise, you will be surprised, like Evelyn here, why Lavrov is talking about what happened in Bucha. Let's just try and be curious.
And the last question, please. You have to press the button. Antonio Guterres said the other day that Russia and the United States must reduce their nuclear arsenals. Have this raised this issue with you during your face-to-face meeting, and what will be the conditions for Russia to accept this? Well, he did not raise this issue. He does make statements of this kind from time to time. We have not been increasing our arsenals, and our official representatives have said as much. Until 2026, there is a new START treaty in force, which sets forth the relevant levels, and this is what we use as our guidance. And so far, this treaty is in force. We suspended our involvement, but we undertook to respect the levels it sets forth and to exchange some kinds of information. But of course, it is not up to the UN Secretary General to be involved on these matters. Of course, we want fewer arms, and this is our unwavering position, but there's a reality, and we have to abide by it. Thank you so much, colleagues.